Okay, so good day class. So today we're going to discuss about the revised implementing rules and regulations for BP 220. So I think back in the midterms we discussed about PD 1096 and PD 957. So this BP 220 is somewhat similar to it as it still affects the practice of architecture and the construction industry in general. Okay, so before the finals ends, what we're going to do is that you are going to make a comparison between the three standards: BB220, PD957, and PD1096. Okay, so in general class, I'm going to discuss here the basic law governing BP220. Then, like we did in our PD957, you're going to be the one to summarize these standards. Okay, so I find it that it would be easier for you to learn the standards if you're going to do it that way. So let's begin. So the revised implementing rules and regulations for BB220 with amendments by the Housing, Land Use and Realty Board, November 2008. Or these are the table of contents. So this week we're going to discuss about Rule 1 and Rule 2. But we're only going to discuss Section 1, Section 2, Section 3, and Section 4. So in Section 5 plus, that's something that you're going to research. Okay, so you're going to make a table for that. So that you'll be able to familiarize yourselves with the different standards. Okay, so let's discuss. So pursuant to Section 3 of BP 220, the Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board is authorized to establish and promulgate two levels of standards and technical requirements for the development of economic and socialized housing projects in urban and rural areas from those provided in PD 957, PD 1216, PD 1096, and PD 1185. Hence, the following rules are hereby promulgated. So, going to take note, class, PD 957, we discussed this one in the early part of our midterms. You have the PD 1216, which is about the open spaces. PD 1096, the National Building Code. PD 1185, which is the fire code. I think this is already um, amended. So there's a new fire code. This is the fire code of 2008. So rule 1, scope and limitation. So these rules and standards shall apply to the development of economic and socialized housing projects in urban and rural areas as defined in Section 2 of BP 220. They shall apply to the development of either a house and a lot or a house or a lot only. So there are cases, class, that it's going to be a house and lot or a house or a lot only. Okay, so take note of this one, class. I think I'm going to ask you, going to make you an assignment. What happens if it's a house only? So I think you've heard about subdivisions when they sell, it's a lot only. But I think it's a new term when you say it's a house only. So how do you define the ownership if it's only a house? Okay, then you have section 2, declaration of policies. It is a policy of the government to promote and encourage the development of economic and socialized housing projects, primarily by the private sector, in order to make available adequate economic and socialized housing units for average and low income earners in urban and rural areas. We have Rule 2, the minimum design standards and requirements for economic and socialized housing projects. Section 3, the compliance with standards and guidelines. So the development of economic and socialized housing projects shall be in accordance with the minimum standards set forth. So you have Section 4, the basis and objectives of the minimum design standards. The minimum design standards set forth herein are intended to provide minimum requirements within the generally accepted levels of safety, health, and ecological considerations. Variations, however, are also possible as may be based on some specific regional, cultural, and economic setting. For example, the building materials, space requirements, and usage. This minimum design standards encourages the use of duly accredited indigenous materials and technology, such as innovative design and systems, modular systems, and components, among others. The parameters used in formulating these design standards are: A is to protect and safety of life, limb, property, and the general public welfare. Okay, so this design standard should advocate protection of life and limb. So what does it mean? So it should protect life. Okay, so it should not cause death, and limb, meaning it should not cause accidents when you're going to lose an arm or a leg. Property, and of course the general public welfare. So the basic needs of human settlements enumerated in descending order as follows. So the most important is water. Next is movement and circulation. You have storm drainage, solid and liquid waste disposal, parks and playgrounds, then power. So there are six guys listed here. So now we are in the modern era. Where do you think we're going to place your internet connection? So that's something that for you to reflect on. So the provision of these basic needs shall be based on the actual setting within which the project site is located. Then there's also a affordability levels of target market. So affordable cost refers to the most reasonable price of land and shelter based on the needs and financial capability of program beneficiaries and appropriate financing schemes. That's from RA 7279. Then you have the location. So both economic and socialized housing projects shall be located within suitable site for housing and outside potential hazard-prone and protection areas. Okay, class, so what does this mean? So when you have your socialized housing, it doesn't mean that it's socialized or you're going to locate it in a geohazard area. So you have to make sure that its area is still safe. So that's where we're going to locate it. Okay? So these are its four considerations. So let's go back. So the basis and objectives of the minimum design standards. So your minimum design standards are based on these four criterias. So protection of life, limb property, and general public welfare, basic needs of human settlements, affordability levels of the target market, and location. So of course, you're going to make sure that when you do your socialized housing, it should be affordable. So you don't want to design something that is too extravagant for its users. It's already outside their financial capacity. Then it should be located in a safe area. Then it should contain these basic needs. We should have water. There should be circulation. So what does it mean? It should be at least be connected to a road. Okay, so that the people living in the area, at least they can access going to your supermarkets, they can go to church, their children can go to schools. Of course, there should be storm drainage, especially that we are located in a typhoon-prone country. Okay? Then solid and liquid waste disposal. Okay, this is very important because if there's no sanitation, then what would happen? Uh, these areas they will be very affected. Then parks and playground. Then of course power. Then you have later age is also of equal importance. It should protect life, limb, property, and the general public welfare. So these are the four things you must put into mind. Okay. Now let's go to section 5, the technical guidelines and standards for subdivisions. So in determining whether an economic and socialized housing shall be allowed, the following guidelines shall be considered. Site criteria. So the availability of basic needs. So The prioritized basic needs cited earlier shall preferably be available with reasonable distance from the project site, but where these are not available, the same shall be provided for by the developer. So when you have an economic and socialized housing class, it's important that it has uh, a connection for water, then it has a road connection going to the different, for example, it's near schools. It should have access to public markets. Okay? And it should have access to churches or places of worship. Okay, so these are very important. So these are basic, but it's very important. I think I forgot something. So one more basic need is that uh, the location of your um, BP220 or socialized housing, it should be in a place that's near their source of income. So you don't want to make a subdivision that is too far away, wherein the people will have to spend a lot of money for transportation going to work. Okay? So you have to consider class. You have to sympathize with the people that are staying in this kind of development. So probably their income levels are not that high. So you must make sure that they can have access to their livelihood. So you don't want to cut them from their livelihood. Okay? So next is conformity with the zoning ordinance or land use of the municipality. Okay, so I'm not going to read it, so I'll just explain it to you. So when you see conformity with the zoning ordinance or land use of the city or municipality, it just simply means that where you're going to place your socialized subdivision, its land use should be intended for housing development. Otherwise, if it's an agricultural area or forest area, you have to convert the land use. But then again, you must make sure that where you're going to transfer or when you're going to build your socialized housing project, it is within a place within a reasonable distance to their source of income or livelihood. Otherwise, it will not work. Okay, so that's why class, there's a lot of problems here in the Philippines, especially with socialized housing projects because some developers, they tend to develop their socialized housing projects too far away from the sources of livelihood. So unless uh, you can make sure that when you're going to place your socialized housing very far, unless you can make sure that you can provide for their livelihood, then don't do it. Okay, so design it when you design your uh, socialized housing units, it should be near to their livelihood, near to basic amenities. Okay, so when you design class, someday your socialized subdivisions, your socialized, okay, and economic subdivisions, you have to empathize, you have to think in a humane manner. Okay, so don't be architects just purely in it for the money. So we are architects class. We are here for the benefit of humanity also. So when we design, always make sure that uh, you cover all the bases as cited here in BP 220. Okay, then we have the physical suitability. So the site, a potential site must have characteristics assuring healthful, safe, environmentally sound community. So enough to accommodate foundation load without excessive site works. So let's uh, study this class. Think carefully. So why is it that it should have accommodate foundation load without excessive site works? So one thing class, if you're going to locate it in a place where there are excessive works on the site, you're going to have problems later on the costing. So it will become too expensive. Okay. So these are the things that you must consider. And also, when you locate your subdivision, you must make sure that it is in a healthy place. So it should not be near a dump site. So it should not be a place which is unhealthy. Okay, then accessibility. So the site must be served by a road. So I think I have cited this earlier. That is readily accessible to public transportation lines. So one problem class in socialized housing in the Philippines is that when they construct socialized housing uh, projects, there are no transportation lines. Although there's a road, but there's no transportation line. So what do I mean by that? So you construct a subdivision that is far from the city. So but there are no routes, jeepney routes. So how will they reach the intended destination? So you have to put into consideration that since these are low income families, then probably mo- most of them don't have cars. So that's why you must make sure that their location, uh, there must be a plan for public transportation to pass by that area. Okay? So it's different from when you just design subdivisions for the middle class and the upper middle class or the high end people. Because even if you locate them in a place that is far away, these people can afford the transportation systems. You can buy their car. So when you design for uh, socialized housing, you must make sure that the place where it's located, there's a public transport system available as much as possible. Or when you do that subdivision, you must all the developer must work in parallel with the local government units to ensure that there's going to be public transportation or jeepneys passing by that area. Otherwise, it will fail. It's because if it gets too expensive, of course, nobody would want to live there. Your socialized subdivision project is. Okay. You have your B, the planning considerations, the area planning. The project design should consider not only the reduction of cost of development to a minimum, but also the provision for possible future improvement, expansion, as in the description of sizes, right of way of roads, open space, allocation of areas common utilities and facilities, land allocation, alignment of the various utilities, roads, drainage, power, and water of the subdivision shall be integrated with those of existing networks as well as projects outside the boundaries of the project site. Example, access roads set forth herein and should follow the standards and specifications of the Department of Public Works and Highways. Then you also have the site preservation, alteration, the slope. The finished grade shall have a desired slope to allow rainwater to be channeled into street drains. Where cut and fill is necessary, an appropriate grade shall be attained to prevent any depression in the area. So grading and ditching shall be executed in a manner that will prevent erosion or flooding of adjoining properties. So this is something that's also important class to consider the slope. So when you design, always make sure that there's the water, the flow of uh, storm water, it does not stay in a certain area so as to cause flooding. So I think you're already familiar with what's happening in the city. So there's flooding because there are areas that are too low, and then when when there's high tide from the sea, so it merges with the rainwater from the mountains of Bukidnon, so there's flooding. Okay, so those are things that you must avoid when you design your subdivisions. So there's always be drainage systems. You always have to make sure that the roads are sloped in such a way that the water won't stay at the center, it flows to the drainage systems. Another is preservation of site assets. So suitable trees with a caliper of 200 millimeters or more shrubs and desirable ground cover shall be preserved. Whether a good quality topsoil and exists in the site, it shall not be removed and shall be preserved for finishing grades of yards, playgrounds, parks, and garden area. So I think last this is something the preservation of site assets is something that is should not only be considered in BP 220 projects, but also in when you just do high-end residential projects in the high end. Okay, so it will not only make your it will not only reduce cost since you're already you're reducing developmental cost, but you're also helping the environment as well. Okay, so let's move. Ground cover. So grass, shrubs, plants, and other landscaping materials used for ground cover shall be of variety appropriate for its intended use and location. They shall be planted as to allow complete and permanent cover of the area. Then you have your easements. Subdivision projects shall observe and conform to the provisions of easements as required by Chapter 4, Section 51 of the Water Code of the Philippines on water bodies. So this is important, class, especially when your development is near a body of water, such as a river, a lake, or the sea. Then you have the National Power Corporation transmission lines, fault traces as event identified by FIVOX, right of way of other public companies and other entities. For projects abutting national roads, adequate easement shall be provided for road including loading and unloading as may be required by the national government units and other related laws. So let's discuss the easements. So first, you have the Water Code of the Philippines. Second, I think this is understandable. The National Power Corporation Philippines transmission lines. Third is the most important for me. So you have to make sure that you place your socialized housing, it should be as far away as possible from fault lines. Especially class since it is socialized housing, so you don't want to spend more on the geotechnical site or the foundation because you're going to place your socialized housing project on a fault line, then you're going to spend more. So it will not equate economically for the developer as well. So you have to make sure do your research and build it in a place that is far away from fault lines. Then right away with other public companies and other entities. So when you say like that, when you say that last, probably there's a tower for globe or smart or telecom units. Then you have letter E, which is the most important, is that it should be connected to a road class that in such that has already public transport, as what I have said earlier. Okay, so if it's if you're going to place your socialized housing in a highway, always make sure that you place a loading or unloading area so as not to disturb the flow of traffic. Okay, so you integrate that as part of your subdivision. So that's also for the safety of the people. Then you have four circulation. So depending on the classification of roads adjacent to the subdivision and the size of the project site, road network shall result to a hierarchy of functions and should define and serve the subdivision as one integrated unit. So what this means is that there are different sizes of roads, just like in PD 957 or in PD 1096. So roads complemented with pathwalks within the subdivision must be aligned to facilitate movement within and linking subdivision to the nearest major transportation route and adjacent property. So whenever there is an existing road within the project site which shall be made part of a subdivision, this shall be improved in accordance with the standards set forth herein. The next, street should conform to the contours of the land as much as practicable. Okay, then provisions of major street extension for connection to adjoining, developed, and or underdeveloped properties shall be mandatory and integrated or aligned with existing ones, if any. So streets shall be laid out to minimize critical intersections such as blind corners, skew junctions, etc. Letter E class is where your specialty as architects or professionals in planning come in. So when you design, you must make sure that there are less critical intersections. Because when you learn how to drive, I think it's important for you to learn how to drive so that you'll be able to think when you design roads that there are no blind corners when you can't see what's coming next. Okay, so put yourselves in the position of those using the road, those passing by the road. Okay, so probably class, when you say socialized housing, only very few of them have cars, so that's their demographic profile, social profile. So probably they're using motorcycles. So as you can see, I think motorcycles they're very prone to accidents, especially here in the Philippines. So you must design the roads in such a way that there are uh, very few blind spots, okay, or eliminate them completely. Then the road shall conform with civil work design criteria as per section of 10.B.3 of the rules of these rules and sound engineering practices. So there see you have the design parameters. Okay, so this is the last page we're going to discuss about rule 1 and 2. I think so we're already in rule 2. So design parameters, land allocation, the sellable areas. There shall be no fixed ratio between the sellable portion and non-sellable portion of a subdivision project. So in a socialized housing project class, so there's no fixed ratio. The non-sellable area shall conform with the minimum requirements for open spaces, comprising those allotted for circulation systems, community facilities, and parks and playgrounds. Then you have the allocation area for parks and playgrounds. Okay, so if a density of 150 and below, so you allocate 3.5% of the gross area for if it's economic. For socialized housing, if the density is 150 and below, you allocate 3.5%. Then if it's already above, which is the maximum above 225 uh, lots per hectare, then you allocate 9% of the gross area. So in no case shall an area allocated for parks and playgrounds be less than 100 square meters. So this is really important class to remember. So sometimes in design, when you reach your higher design, then your design instructor will give you a plate. And then what if you're going to place an area that is less than 100 square meters? Since it's just socialized housing, so automatically your design is wrong. Okay? So I think we've covered for our lesson for this week. So we're going to have an activity class for this week. So I'm going to post it in our FB page. So try to read, and if you have any questions, you can reach me anytime. You can send an email or send a PM on Facebook, and I'll try my best to answer your query. Okay, so good luck, class. Then uh, study these laws well because someday when you'll be practicing architects or even when you're doing your thesis, these rules are very important. Okay, so keep safe and see you next week.